Gary's girlfriend, whom he had been dating for 3 months, decided to break up with him. Gary is a single father raising his 11-year-old daughter. He didn't believe his new girlfriend could be a good enough mother for Emma. Also, Gary doesn't know how to express his feelings, which became a problem in the relationship. At home, Gary prepared breakfast for Emma, who is interested in astronomy. The relationship between father and daughter is complicated. Emma has withdrawn into herself and refuses to accept her father's help with anything. On the way to school, Emma was nervous because they were already late. The girl was on the verge of a panic attack. This has been happening frequently lately. When Gary got distracted from driving, they were hit by a jeep. Fortunately, neither the father nor the daughter were injured. They were helped by the guilty party of the accident, a sweet red-haired girl who began to calm Emma down. Gary was surprised at how quickly the girl prevented Emma's panic attack. To make amends, the girl bought a science fiction book as a gift for Emma. Gary did not expect to see the culprit of the accident on his doorstep, who as it turned out got their address from the insurance company. Emma accepted the book, although she did not hide her displeasure. Gary invited the new acquaintance inside, but she, very embarrassed, hurried to leave. Gary followed the girl, offering tea. The girl, whose name is Mary, eventually agreed. She explained that she had been living in Australia for 12 years. There are family photographs in Gary's house. His wife Lisa passed away from cancer. He and Emma still haven't come to terms with it. While making tea, Gary cut his finger. Mary offered to go to the bathroom for a band-aid. In the hallway she crossed paths with Emma, who immediately sensed something was wrong with their new acquaintance. Later, Mary was carefully treating Gary's cut, and Emma was watching them surreptitiously. It seemed they would become friends. Over a cup of tea, Mary shared that she left Chicago because she wanted a change. Gary was surprised to learn that Mary volunteers for charitable organizations. By education she is a psychologist but stopped practicing because it's hard for her to interact with people. Now Mary is a journalist and runs her advice column on a website. When Mary deliberately spilled tea on herself, Gary ran to the kitchen for a towel. Returning to the porch, he found that Mary was gone. Feeling awkward, Mary wanted to leave, but Gary caught up with her and asked what had happened. Mary still feels out of place, not knowing how to explain her behavior. Gary in turn confessed that after his wife's passing, it has been difficult for him to handle Emma. He really lacks support. Gary and Mary agreed to have lunch together tomorrow. Gary asked his new acquaintance to promise not to run away again. That night there was a full moon. The next day Gary and Mary met. While Gary is fully absorbed in his work and raising his daughter, Mary has many unusual hobbies. Gary took Mary to a nice Italian restaurant, but she immediately got nervous and left, saying she was a vegetarian. Mary suggested Gary go to the first bar they came across. He immediately realized that this girl was different from others. Sipping wine, they discussed various topics. Up to this point Gary hadn't genuinely laughed in a long time. They didn't notice how several hours passed, continuing to chat and drink. Mary gave Gary some advice on how to improve his relationship with the daughter. Now Emma is distancing herself from the father because after her mother's demise, she is afraid of forming attachments. Gary shared that after losing his wife when the daughter was 4, he was in despair. But now Gary is ready to move on. Of course he doesn't intend to sue Mary over the accident. At some point they almost kissed, but suddenly Mary realized it was already 6 o'clock and ran off, leaving Gary completely bewildered. Mary ran as fast as she could. For many years she has lived alone, not risking letting anyone into her life. But after meeting Gary something in her has changed. The sun was almost setting, and Mary started running even faster. Once home, she quickly locked herself in a specially equipped basement bunker. No one must know Mary's terrible secret. In the evening, Emma was lying unconscious in the bathtub. Water began to overflow the tub. Frightened, Gary broke down the door and urgently took his daughter to the hospital. He prayed for only one thing, that she would be okay. In the emergency room they received help. As soon as Sarah, Gary's late wife's sister, learned about what happened, she came immediately. At that moment he really needed support. They waited in the hospital corridor for news. Gary blames himself, but Sarah knows for sure that he is trying to be a good father to Emma. However, psychotherapy has had no effect on her so far. Soon a nurse informed them that Emma had regained consciousness. In the ward, Gary hugged his daughter. When Emma was discharged, she started seeing a psychotherapist again. The doctor asked why she tried to harm herself. Emma had no answer to this question. The psychiatrist decided to change her medication. There is still no understanding between father and daughter, although Gary does everything to find common ground with her. However, Emma has withdrawn even more, avoiding any attachments. To distract herself, she decided to read the book Mary had given her. In the morning, as usual, Gary was making breakfast for his daughter, but she refused to eat. Gary doesn't know what he can do to help the daughter. Emma doesn't like that the father's life revolves entirely around her. She wishes her father would have his own personal life and be happy. When Gary started talking about his late wife, Emma couldn't stand it and left the table. The breakfast burned on the stove. While Gary was busy, Sarah would look after Emma. Despite trusting Sarah, Gary worries a lot about his daughter. A little later, seeing a couple with a baby in the parking lot, Gary couldn't hold back his tears, remembering Lisa. He misses his wife very much. Gary met an Asian girl who spoke poor English at a cafe in the mall. He occasionally goes on dates, hoping to find his soulmate. The date didn't go very well. In the same mall, Gary accidentally bumped into Mary, who spilled coffee on him. By the way, Mary had come here for raw meat. Gary wonders why Mary ran away from their date a month ago. The girl said she has a complicated life and many problems. Gary doesn't understand what problems she is talking about. He has been a widower for a long time, and since then, his life has not been the best. When Lisa passed away, Gary disappeared for 6 months because he couldn't cope with it. During that time, Lisa's relatives took care of Emma. Gary is still ashamed of this. Mary confessed that her husband also passed away many years ago. When they were traveling through Europe, a tragedy occurred. Mary moved here to escape everything, but it turned out that you can't run away from yourself. Suddenly Mary kissed Gary and then immediately left. Gary was so shocked that he didn't notice right away that Mary had accidentally taken his keys. He ran after her, but she had already gotten into her Jeep and driven away. Gary caught a taxi and asked the driver to follow the woman in the Jeep. On the way, he called Sarah and told her he would be late. Sarah was very happy for Gary, thinking that his date had gone well. Lisa would have wanted him to move on. At Gary's request, the driver continued to follow Mary's Jeep. That's how he found out where she lived. Seeing Gary, Mary got nervous. He in turn was puzzled as to why she needed live chickens. While Mary was bustling around, Gary decided to enter her house. Besides chickens, Mary had large stocks of raw meat. Realizing that Gary was in the house, Mary got angry. Gary was puzzled as to why Mary needed a basement bunker and what a live goat was doing there. Mary already understood that Gary would inevitably learn her secret. Her body began to undergo some metamorphoses. She locked herself in the basement. At that moment, all the doors and windows in the house became blocked. Gary didn't understand what was happening. Terrible sounds started coming from the basement. Gary was seriously frightened, calling out for Mary. Slowly approaching the basement door and peeking through a crack, he was shocked to see that Mary had turned into a huge wolf. That's why she needed the chickens and the goat. Mary had kept this secret for a long time and couldn't share it with anyone. But now someone had learned the truth. This is very dangerous for both Gary and Mary. Terrified out of his mind, Gary stayed in Mary's house until morning. The blinds and doors are always locked until Mary opens the basement. Now at dawn she had taken her usual form, but Gary was still very frightened. Later, when they had both calmed down a bit, Mary explained that she couldn't control her transformations. Many years ago, during a trip with her husband David, she was bitten by a dog in Prague. At least they thought it was a dog. Suddenly Mary felt thirsty and went to the kitchen for some water. Gary wanted to take this chance to grab his keys and escape, but he didn't make it in time. Mary saw no point in hiding the fact that in her wolf form, she had attacked her husband. Mary doesn't remember the details. She only remembers waking up in the forest, and David was lifeless beside her. The police concluded that a wild animal had attacked David. David was the first but not the last victim of Mary. Besides him, there was also an Italian family. Mary doesn't want anyone else to get hurt, so every full moon she locks herself in the basement. She uses chickens or less often goats as food. Gary is the first person Mary has entrusted with her secret. In tears she asked Gary to promise that he wouldn't tell anyone about it. All Gary wants now is to take his keys and leave. However, Mary doesn't want to let him go just like that, believing that their meeting was fate. But Gary was too scared to stay with Mary. Wrapped in a blanket she followed him outside, saying that their meeting happened on the anniversary of David's demise. These words made Gary stop. That day was also the anniversary of Lisa's demise. Mary swore that she wouldn't harm him or Emma. But Gary was still not convinced, considering Mary dangerous. He left. At home, Mary hurried to pack the essentials, realizing that she was no longer safe here. However, something prevented her from leaving just like that. Walking down the street, Gary tried to make sense of what he had seen that night. Arriving at Sarah's house and her family, Gary without any explanation jumped into the pool to clear his head. Finding out that Gary hadn't slept all night, Sarah and her husband congratulated him. Gary objected, saying it wasn't what they thought. After picking flowers, Mary went to the nursing home where she volunteered. The elderly patients love Mary very much, who is kind to everyone. By helping people, Mary wants to somehow compensate for the harm she caused to others when she was in wolf form. Mary regretfully told one of the patients that she would have to leave. Mary can no longer stay in Adelaide, even though she will miss Gary very much. He is sweet, and Mary is sorry that nothing worked out between them. Before Gary left with his daughter, Sarah told him that he shouldn't blame himself for dating a girl. Since it was Sunday, Gary suggested to his daughter, who still looked sad, that they have lunch somewhere. She chose an Italian restaurant. Looking at the family at the next table, Gary thought about how one of those families had fallen victim to Mary. After the restaurant, Emma asked her father how his date went. Gary replied that the girl wasn't right for him. There in the parking lot, Gary crashed into someone's car. It turned out to be Mary's Jeep. Gary still didn't want to believe that their meeting was fate and not just a coincidence. In a fit of emotion, he accidentally pressed the gas pedal and drove straight into the restaurant building. Fortunately, once again, neither he nor his daughter was injured, but the damage was significant. While Gary assured the restaurant owners that he would cover all the costs, Emma noticed Mary in the parking lot and went to her. Mary knew that Gary wouldn't like this, but another car had blocked her way. Emma told Mary that she had read the book. Seeing his daughter next to Mary, Gary yelled that it was dangerous. Emma didn't understand what her father meant. In an attempt to leave, Mary crashed into a truck. It all seemed like a series of ridiculous accidents. When Mary asked Gary about the people in the restaurant, he replied that fortunately no Italians were hurt. Mary caught the hint. Suddenly Emma invited Mary to dinner. Gary didn't want this, but Mary did come to their house that evening. For the first time in a long while, Emma looked happy and even wore a beautiful dress. Gary prepared a vegan dinner. Mary said she wasn't hungry because she had eaten before coming. Gary asked his daughter to go and pick some aromatic herbs for dinner because there was clearly a lot unsaid between him and Mary. Mary just wanted to make sure that Gary hadn't told anyone her secret. After that, she promised to disappear from his life forever. Gary would have been quite happy with that arrangement. When Emma returned, they immediately started smiling and chatting in a deliberately sweet way. During dinner, the conversation didn't flow well. Emma asked Mary how long she had been a vegetarian. Mary replied that sometimes she eats meat. This comment made Gary even more nervous. Emma mentioned that she was seeing a psychiatrist, but the treatment wasn't helping. Mary, who has a degree in psychology, said that often patients just need someone they can fully trust and who can truly listen to them. Gary didn't like Mary giving Emma advice. Father and daughter quarreled, and Emma ran out from the table. Mary knocked on the girl's room door to say goodbye. In reality, Emma was glad that Mary stopped by. The girl was sorely lacking in motherly love, and for some reason she saw this in Mary. Emma wished her father would find new love. Gary overheard their sincere conversation. Mary was heartbroken at the thought of never seeing Gary again. Before leaving, she gave Emma a disc with her favorite music. Gary didn't know what to do in this complicated situation. He followed Mary, saying that even Emma felt a connection between them. Gary wanted to be with Mary, but at the same time he couldn't accept the fact that she wasn't entirely human. In tears, Mary replied that no one is perfect. She understood that it would be better if they ended this right now. While thinking about it, Gary called Sarah and asked if she could watch Emma for a while. Sarah realized something was happening in Gary's life, but he didn't know how to explain it. Emma listened to the same song in the car for an hour. Gary came to Mary's house and said that he wasn't perfect either. They kissed and then stood hugging for a long time right on the porch. That night Gary stayed at Mary's place. From then on, they became a couple. Over breakfast they discussed their relationship. Mary had let someone into her life for the first time since becoming a werewolf. Gary joked that every wolf needs a pack. Emma continued her sessions with the psychiatrist. After Mary appeared in her father's life, she started to feel positive changes. On Mary's advice, the girl decided to change her therapist. Now Gary, Emma and Mary were like one family. They spent a lot of time together, filling the emptiness in each other's souls. Gary seemed to have accepted the fact that his beloved was half wolf. His relationship with the daughter improved. As the full moon approached, Gary bought live chickens from a farm for Mary. She would have to spend the night in the basement alone. Otherwise they lived an ordinary life, finding happiness in simple things. Gary understood that they couldn't hide the truth from Emma for long. On the next full moon, they would have to bring Emma to Mary's house and show her everything. Mary was worried, afraid of losing the people dearest to her. Gary decided it was time to introduce Mary to his relatives. Recently Sarah and her husband had a second daughter, whom they named Lisa. Their cat hissed at Mary. During dinner Gary mentioned that he, Mary and Emma were planning a picnic for the weekend. When Gary wanted to hold little Lisa and suggested Mary do the same, she became nervous. In the kitchen, Mary confessed to Gary that she was apparently pregnant. Mary was very unhappy about this because she feared their child might be a werewolf. Gary said that they would love their child no matter what, but Mary believed it would be better to avoid this idea since in her wolf form she might cause harm. In front of the others they tried to act as if everything was normal. Mary offered everyone a cake that she had baked herself. Mary didn't like sweets, but she often baked cakes for the elderly in the nursing home. Gary couldn't stop thinking about their last conversation. The cat, by the way, had been hiding on the roof all this time. Sarah immediately noticed that Emma had started to improve since Mary appeared. Gary wanted to ask Sarah for advice, but he didn't know what words to use. Besides, they would soon have to tell Emma the truth. Gary had barely found happiness, but it was very fragile. He would accept any decision Mary made and support her in any case. Mary didn't know what to do. She needed to think it over alone. At the weekend they went on a picnic as planned. Now Emma looked like a completely healthy and happy child. Mary feared that if Emma learned the truth, everything would change for the worse. Tomorrow was the full moon, so they couldn't delay the conversation any longer. Trying to choose his words as carefully as possible, Gary told his daughter that she needed to know something about Mary. At that moment Mary revealed her pregnancy, thus letting Gary know that she would keep the baby. Emma was very excited about this news. They watched the sunrise together, enjoying the beautiful scenery. When it was fully light, they were preparing to return home. Gary and Mary decided to tell Emma the second piece of news later. Gary couldn't start the car. Mary grew nervous because tonight would be the full moon. The worst part was that there was no cell signal here. Gary went to the nearest hill, hoping he could reach the emergency service from there. Mary started to get increasingly anxious. When Emma asked what was wrong, Mary replied that it was because of the hormones. Emma said she hadn't seen her father this happy in a long time. He used to pretend, but now he was genuinely happy. Gary managed to reach the emergency service, but Adelaide was more than 150 miles away, so there was no guarantee they would send someone today. The closer the sunset came, the more panicked Mary became. If she stayed here she could harm Gary and Emma. The girl watched the argument between her father and stepmother, not understanding what was happening. Gary tried to calm his beloved, saying it wasn't her fault. Mary told him and Emma to lock themselves in the car, and she ran as fast as she could. The sun would set soon. For Mary the most important thing right now was to get as far away from Gary and Emma as possible. Night fell. The sky was illuminated by the full moon. Gary and his daughter waited in the car. At some point Emma needed to get out. The father said they couldn't leave the car. Emma didn't understand why Mary had ran off somewhere alone. Just yesterday they had camped here, but today the father claimed it was dangerous outside. Gary knew he had no choice but to tell his daughter the truth. But at that moment he saw an approaching truck, and it wasn't the emergency service. Gary realized that Mary could attack at any moment and tried to convince the two guys to leave right away. However, their intentions were far from good. The guys began kicking the car, trying to force Gary and his daughter out. Emma was very scared. Suddenly Mary in her wolf form attacked one of the guys first, then the other. She got rid of the bullies in front of Gary, who was frozen with horror hugging his daughter. After finishing her meal, the wolf approached the car. Gary still couldn't move from fear. When Emma asked what it was, Gary replied that it was Mary and that sometimes she turned into a wolf. Mary didn't touch them and ran away. Emma had a panic attack from what she had seen. Gary tried to calm his daughter. Only when he sang her favorite song did she was able to regain her breath. They hugged. The worst was over. Early in the morning Mary returned to them in human form. Emma watched them from the car, not knowing what to feel. Gary managed to fix the car. They drove back in silence. Emma played the disc with Mary's favorite music, letting her know that all was well between them. Mary doesn't know if she deserves to be happy after what she did to her husband. Every full moon, she locks herself in the basement to avoid harming anyone. But recently Mary met two people who were as broken as she was. They found happiness in each other and became a family. Soon Mary and Gary had a wedding. At some point Mary felt something strange in her belly. It turned out to be just a nightmare. Mary put her house up for sale and moved in with Gary. He was going to equip the basement for her. Mary is very anxious about her pregnancy but refuses to go for an ultrasound, fearing the doctor might see something that can't be shown to anyone. At work, Gary watched a documentary about wolves and learned that a she-wolf can give birth to up to 10 pups. Gary works at the tax office, and his new client is a woman named Caroline. Noticing a photo of a girl, Caroline asked Gary if he had any other children. He replied that his girlfriend was 6 months pregnant. Mary wants to ensure the basement in the house is secure. She is also concerned about Emma, who is preparing to go to high school. To distract her stepdaughter, Mary suggested they sit by the seaside. Emma is worried about high school. She has no friends, but maybe she will make some. Despite the strong waves, Mary and Emma decided to take a swim. The next morning Emma got ready, and the father and stepmother drove her to school. It was a difficult time for all of them. Gary equipped the basement for Mary with all the comforts, including a TV with wildlife screensavers, a dog bed and toys. However, Mary did not appreciate this, saying they should be concerned about safety, not furnishings. Sarah, her husband and their children paid an unexpected visit to bring baby items. Sarah also gave Mary the business card of her obstetrician-gynecologist. Feeling very nervous, Mary left under the pretext of an urgent matter. Finding dog toys in the basement, Olivia, Sarah's daughter, thought Gary and Mary had gotten a dog. However, Gary denied having both a dog and a basement. Mary isn't ready to sell her house, so she scared off potential buyers by saying terrible things had happened in the basement. Mary understands she should go to the doctor but can't bring herself to do it. She was so deep in thought that she forgot to pick up Emma from school on time. However, the girl didn't take offense. Mary and Gary visited Dr. Peter Stenning, an obstetrician gynecologist. Mary asked if her labor could be induced artificially before the full moon. Alas, Dr. Stenning had to refuse because Mary had no medical indications for it. He scheduled her for an ultrasound and recommended prenatal yoga classes. The couple decided to follow the advice, but Mary felt nothing but irritation. She was very worried about their future baby. After yoga, she shared her concerns with Gary, who thought she should still get an ultrasound to find out for sure whether their baby would be human or a werewolf. Anna, a woman from the prenatal class, invited Mary to an organic cafe where other expectant mothers gathered. Mary wanted to decline, but Gary thought it was a great idea as a distraction. Among the other expectant mothers, Mary felt out of place. She had an overwhelming craving for raw meat. At home, Mary told Gary that she wouldn't be able to be a good mother to their child. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the school principal. Gary and Mary rushed over. It turned out that Emma had allegedly pushed a classmate in the bathroom. Mary immediately understood that it was actually different. Emma admitted that she had stood up for her classmate Abigail. Mary could not let it go and made it clear that no one dared to offend her stepdaughter. Gary was delighted with his beloved. They were also glad that Emma now had a friend Abigail. Mary's emotions were running high. She started crying for no reason. Finding gnawed chicken bones in the back seat, Emma quickly threw them out so that Abigail wouldn't notice. Mary finally decided to undergo an ultrasound. When the doctor stepped out, Mary pulled chloroform and a towel from her bag, telling Gary that if anything went wrong, they would knock out the doctor and escape. Gary was clearly not ready for such a turn of events. Fortunately, the baby was completely healthy. And most importantly, he was human. At that moment, Gary and Mary felt absolutely happy. Mary ended up selling her house. Now she felt at peace about her baby. Life went on as usual. Gary and Mary were preparing for the baby. Emma was happy that she would have a brother or sister. Emma got a pet, a school rabbit named Anthony Hopkins. Gary made sure the security system in their house was working properly. Emma was going to spend the full moon at her aunt's place. During the upcoming full moon, Gary and Mary decided to test her maternal instinct in her wolf form. If the maternal instinct prevailed, she would choose the live chickens over the doll. Mary was very anxious, fearing the worst outcome. If labor occurred during the full moon, it would be a disaster. Gary hugged his beloved, promising that everything would be fine. In the evening, he locked the basement door. Emma, Sarah and her husband Ray were watching a horror movie about werewolves. Suddenly Emma had a panic attack. Ray rushed to get the medication, but Olivia had just fed Emma's pills to the fish in the aquarium. Mary's maternal instinct did not prevail. Ignoring the terrifying sounds in the basement, Gary received a call from Sarah, who said Emma was having a panic attack. Gary was going to take the medicine to them, but before leaving, he discovered that the security system had malfunctioned. The windows and doors were locked, but the basement was open. Gary tried to move quietly, knowing that Mary in her wolf form was somewhere in the house. Soon his worst fears were confirmed. There was nowhere to run, the doors and windows still locked, so Gary decided to hide in the bedroom. While the werewolf rampaged in the kitchen, Gary hid in the closet. The wolf was overturning everything in its path. Suddenly Gary's phone rang. The sound attracted the wolf's attention. Gary tried not to breathe, knowing he had no chance against the predator. The werewolf entered the nursery and started smashing things up. Gary listened to this in horror, then decided to come out of the closet. Of course, the predator quickly smelled him. Gary started to run, begging his beloved to stop. However, the wolf did not respond to the name Mary, slowly creeping up on its prey. Gary tried to awaken memories in Mary, but at that moment she was only interested in food. Gary had to sacrifice the daughter's rabbit to lure the wolf into the basement. It worked. Gary was on the verge of a panic attack himself. After calming down a bit, he was going to take the pills to his daughter, but Emma and Sarah had already come on their own because they couldn't reach him by phone. Gary tried to explain to his daughter that the rabbit had broken out of, but he lured it back with another rabbit. Gary chose his words carefully so that Sarah wouldn't suspect anything. However, Sarah did sense that something was wrong. Emma wanted to stay home, but the father insisted that she spend the night at her aunt's. Gary was still very frightened. When Mary turns into a wolf, she is driven only by instincts. In the morning, the windows and doors automatically unlocked. Seeing the mess in the house, Mary didn't want to believe she had done it. Mary understood that she had to leave to ensure the safety of those she loved. Mary thought about this while cleaning up the rooms. Emma tried to support Mary, who felt sorry for having eaten Anthony Hopkins. Mary wanted to talk to Gary, but he was clearly not ready to discuss what had happened. There was tension in the family. On the way to school, Emma was making a playlist for Mary's baby to cheer her up. Gary had no idea what to do in this situation. He bought a new rabbit for his daughter in advance. In the school parking lot, he accidentally drove into Caroline's car, whom he had met earlier at the tax office. They had a nice chat. Melanie, the school psychologist, suggested Emma talk about her difficult relationships with her classmates. The girl hesitated but eventually agreed. Mary realized she would never be able to control her wolf, no matter how hard she tried. The door wasn't secure enough. Suddenly Mary ran out into the street but was soon stopped by pains in her belly. Emma shared with the psychologist that her father and stepmother had problems they couldn't tell anyone about. Melanie suggested the girl use metaphors to describe the situation. Knowing her words wouldn't be taken seriously, Emma said that every full moon, her stepmother turns into a werewolf and locks herself in the basement so she can't hurt anyone. Melanie advised the girl to maintain her personal space, no matter what. Gary's colleagues noticed that he was very pensive today. Meanwhile, Mary went to her former house and explained to the new owners that she had forgotten her basement door there. She would like to get it back. The new owners, a very strange couple, were clearly not friendly and refused Mary's request, threatening to call the police. While driving away, Mary damaged the mirror of an expensive car parked near the house. Gary arrived to pick up his daughter from school, but she said she wanted to hang out with Abigail. Gary was very worried about his daughter, so he followed her hiding behind a bush. Passing guys thought he was crazy. Noticing her father, Emma shouted that he should respect her personal boundaries. Mary met with a dealer from whom she had previously purchased chloroform and bought a gun. It was for Gary in case things got out of control. Gary arrived to pick up his daughter from her friend's house. It seemed like an incredible coincidence, but Caroline turned out to be Abigail's mother. She invited Gary in for tea. While the girls were playing on the trampoline, Gary and Caroline chatted. She was a single mother. Abigail's father had run away as soon as he found out Caroline was pregnant. Until recently she still wasn't ready for a new relationship. At home, Mary was finishing the cleaning. She was upset that Gary and Emma were late. Mary and Gary had a fight. He couldn't believe that she didn't remember anything when she was in wolf form. Mary repeated that during the full moon she couldn't control her actions. Perhaps she and Gary should break up now because it definitely wouldn't get better. The next morning Mary went somewhere, and Gary didn't try to stop her. Instead, Gary went to Mary's former house and told the new owners that he needed this particular basement door. They were perplexed. Gary tried to explain that it was a matter of life and death. The couple demanded $25,000. Gary was ready to do anything for his beloved, so he agreed. At home, Mary shared her plans to go to the abandoned mines during the upcoming full moon, where she definitely wouldn't harm anyone. However, Gary changed her plans. Seeing her basement door, Mary nearly cried tears of happiness. Gary promised to love her for life and proposed to her. Of course Mary agreed. They decided to get married after the baby was born. That same day, Gary replaced the basement door. Their life returned to its usual rhythm. They enjoyed each day. By the way, Mary and Gary resumed attending prenatal yoga classes. Emma, now an ordinary teenager, spends a lot of time with Abigail. Another full moon was approaching. Today Gary, Mary and Emma were going to visit Sarah. At some point Mary felt like a taxi was following them, and despite Gary's attempts to calm her, she sped up. Mary was surprised to see many cars near Sarah's house. It turned out they had decided to throw a party for Mary, inviting patients from the retirement home. This was Emma's initiative. Mary was very pleased. Ray casually asked Gary if there was really a basement in their house. Gary laughed it off, turning it into a joke. Noticing a certain man in the yard, Mary became nervous and tried to chase him away. Gary demanded an explanation. The man's name was Anton, and he was Mary's teacher in Chicago. Mary started getting more and more nervous. She clearly had something to hide. When Sarah suggested that Anton join the party, he readily agreed. Gary asked Mary to explain, but she remained silent. All the guests gave Mary presents. She was clearly not pleased with Anton's presence. They hadn't seen each other for many years. Anton made a toast in Mary's honor. Gary was still trying to figure out what Mary and Anton had in common. Did he know her secret? Anton disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. On the way home, Mary told Gary that Anton indeed knew her secret. Once he had seen her during a full moon. Before that, he didn't believe in Mary's transformations, thinking she was going mad after her husband's demise. Gary felt jealous, thinking that Mary and Anton had an affair in the past. She didn't want to talk about it. That same day, Anton appeared on their doorstep, wanting to talk to Mary. Many years ago she had bitten him, leaving a scar on his hand. After the bite, Anton also became a werewolf. However, unlike Mary, he didn't live in confinement and traveled, giving free rein to his inner beast. Anton believed that people like them shouldn't resist their instincts. They lost track of time during their conversation. The full moon rose, and Mary and Anton began to transform. Mary intended to lock herself in the basement with Anton before it was too late. Gary was categorically against it, but there was no other choice. All night long, Gary watched through the crack at what was happening in the basement. Morning came. Gary was devastated by what he had seen. Mary had cheated on him with Anton, without even remembering it. When Anton came out of the basement, Gary attacked him and threw him out of the house. Mary still didn't understand what was going on. Gary told her about what had happened in the basement last night when she and Anton were in their wolf forms. Mary didn't want to believe it. But it really had happened right in front of Gary's eyes. Mary insisted that she couldn't control her actions during a full moon. Gary couldn't accept this and left. He was very angry and caused an accident on the road, nearly hitting a local homeless man. Gary remembered that on the day Mary's Jeep crashed into his car, Emma had given her school lunch to this homeless man. If she hadn't done that, he and Mary would never have met. Gary wanted to make things right and took the homeless man to the supermarket, buying him a lot of food. However, the homeless man started stealing goods and causing chaos. Olivia and her father saw Gary running out of the store with the homeless man and a cart full of goods. Mary was trying to come to terms with what had happened while Gary took the homeless man to a bar. Gary got drunk, pouring out everything that was on his mind. Mary went to Anton's hotel room, and he thought she was ready to run away with him. All these 12 years he had been searching for her, leaving his wife and children in Chicago. Anton believed that he and she were wild animals meant for each other. However, Mary said that she was not like him. Family was important to her. For the first time in her life, Mary had met people who were ready to accept her as she was. And Mary was not ready to lose this. From now on, Anton must not appear in her life. Now Mary wanted only one thing: to have a family with Gary. But would he forgive her? Gary sought out Anton, stating that something had happened between him and Mary during the night that shouldn't have happened. Anton was genuinely surprised, which confirmed the fact that werewolves remember nothing in their wolf form. Mary chose Gary, which meant she truly loved him. Gary would not allow someone like Anton to take Mary from him. Their fateful meeting had happened because of the homeless man to whom Emma had given a sandwich 10 months ago. In truth, it turned out that this wasn't the same homeless man, but it no longer mattered. Anton had to leave Adelaide without Mary. Gary and Mary reconciled, promising to always take care of each other. They looked forward to their shared future with optimism. Later, Gary and Mary calculated that the baby was due 2 weeks before the full moon. Now Gary wants his beloved to rest constantly and avoid any stress. When Gary took his daughter to school, she said they should tell Aunt Sarah and Ray that Mary is actually a werewolf. However, Gary doubts that Sarah and Ray will be able to comprehend this. The relationship between father and daughter has become perfect. This is what Lisa would have wanted. Unexpectedly, Gary received a call from the police. A detective asked him to come to the station because they had new information about an unsolved case. Gary didn't want Mary to get unnecessarily worried, so he didn't tell her about it. At the police station, the detectives asked him about the day he called the emergency service. The thing is, 2 men went missing that day. Detective Robert Pattinson, who turned out to be Anna's husband, remembered seeing Gary and his girlfriend at prenatal yoga. What a small world. The detectives explained that the bodies of those 2 men were found with signs of an attack by a large wild animal, but there were some strange details. Gary lied that those guys were very kind and helped them jumpstart the Jeep. So far the detectives had no more questions, but Gary still felt anxious. Detective Pattinson caught up with him, asking what car they had taken to the picnic. Gary confused his own words, blaming it on a poor memory. Besides, it had been a long time. On the way home, Gary's anxiety grew. That same day, Sarah and Ray unexpectedly visited them, wanting to talk about the strange things happening with Gary and Mary lately. Gary still denied the existence of a basement in their house. Sarah and Ray's bewilderment intensified when Mary and Emma returned from the farm with a large pig. Emma thought that they could no longer hide the truth from their relatives and said that Mary was a werewolf. Of course, Sarah didn't believe it, but Mary confirmed Emma's words, as did Gary. It sounded so crazy that Sarah and Ray didn't know how to react. Moreover, Sarah was angry, thinking that they had indoctrinated their teenage daughter with the wolf nonsense to hide some dirty secret of their own. The conversation was interrupted by the detectives, who arrived with a warrant to seize Gary's car. Mary was very angry that Gary hadn't told her about talking to the police. Suddenly Mary remembered that she had left a loaded gun in Gary's car glove compartment. Hearing about the gun, Gary was shocked. Mary said they needed to leave immediately for the abandoned mines to hide. If anyone discovered that she was a werewolf, it would be the end for her. Sarah and Ray arrived at their house again, intending to take Emma away. They were convinced that Emma was in danger with her father and stepmother. Gary tried to stop them. At that moment Mary's water broke. Mary's labor had been ongoing for 12 hours. She was panicking because they had only one day until the full moon. Ray and Sarah also went to the hospital to support their loved ones. Sarah tried to get Emma to have a frank conversation. The girl continued to insist that Mary turned into a wolf every full moon. Sarah didn't know what to think. She and Ray would have supported Gary's family anyway. Mary feared she wouldn't be able to give birth before the full moon. If that happened, it would be a disaster. 36 hours had passed, and Dr. Stenning decided to perform a cesarean section. Gary knew it was best to avoid this because it was unclear how Mary would feel as a wolf with stitches from the operation. But it seemed there was no choice. Emma stayed with Mary, distracting her from the pain and taking care of her. Feeling the support of her loved ones, Mary calmed down a bit. There were 4 hours left until the full moon, so Gary had to take Mary to the basement and deliver the baby himself. Gary knew his beloved might eat him, but for the safety of Mary and their child, he was ready for this. While Emma distracted the nurse, Gary took Mary away. Dr. Stenning noticed the patient's disappearance, so Gary had to act quickly. Emma helped her father and stepmother escape. The detectives arrived at the clinic to interrogate Mary right during her labor. Meanwhile, the medical staff continued to chase the escaped patient. Sarah and Ray watched in shock. In the parking lot, Mary felt something was wrong with her body, even though the sun had not yet set. Hearing Mary growl, Sarah and Ray believed she wasn't entirely human and agreed to help them. They hijacked an ambulance. The detectives called for backup. Mary was very scared. Ray, who was driving, sped at full throttle. To calm Mary down, Emma played her favorite song. Seeing Mary gradually transforming into a wolf, Sarah was horrified. Night had already fallen. The most important thing now was to get Mary into the basement. She kept trying to bite everyone. When Mary was brought into the basement, Gary hurriedly blocked the door. He was very worried about how Mary in wolf form would react to the baby. Through the crack, Gary saw that Mary had given birth to a wolf pup. Mary was too exhausted to move. Gary understood he had to enter the basement. Opening the door, he went inside while Emma, Sarah, and Ray waited in the house. Gary tried not to make any sudden movements to avoid provoking Mary's aggression. He also started singing her favorite song. Mary was still too weak to attack. Gary slowly approached, taking the werewolf baby in his arms. Surprisingly, even at that moment, Mary remained calm. Now Sarah and Ray knew the truth. Everyone had already forgotten about the hijacked ambulance outside. The police arrived, ready to enter the house. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.